Hey there. So today is day 7 of the 31 Days of Horror, and earlier today I checked out The Autopsy of Jane Doe. It's a movie that was made in 2016, and it stars Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch, and I just hadn't watched it until now. Um, I may have mentioned it in some of my other videos, but possession, horror, ghost type stuff isn't usually my vibe, so I have a tendency to kind of stray away from those kinds of movies just because they don't hold my interest. But I love Brian Cox. I think Emile Hirsch has been great in all of the films that I've seen him in, and I figured that I would give this one a shot, and I wasn't disappointed. It was entertaining. It was anxiety inducing at times, and it was a really cool concept because they were able to take a concept like an autopsy that is a pretty run of the mill thing. It happens every day, it's a normal thing. And they were able to make it a closed room horror, which is a really cool concept for something somewhat unexpected. Um, I think we've all sort of seen horror movies that take place in hospitals or around, doctors or with law enforcement working with the medical examiner. And I think pretty much our only experience is that the medical examiners usually end up not alive. Um, but it's usually kind of a one-off thing. There's usually the morgue or things having to do with the morgue or autopsies or anything usually just serve as a catalyst of, bodies getting up and walking away, or, you know, the mortuary assistants, or, the medical examiners, or the guy who digs the hole in the cemetery is usually the first to go to kind of um, get the story rolling. So it's not a new concept, but it's a different concept to have the whole thing take place in the mortuary, um, and surround just the one autopsy, tell the story, but kind of have them trapped in that scenario that's created. And I thought that was really creative, and I also thought it was really neat that the cast was very limited. Um, it was really just Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch kind of playing off of each other, and I think they actually played a very convincing father and son. Um, and I think it's really important. We've talked in a couple of the other episodes that I've done about the fact that a lot of horror movies don't really do much character development, and it's usually because I don't think they want to take the time. They're more in for the scares, and they don't really take the time for the character development. But a lot of times, doing that little bit of development can make the whole thing a whole lot scarier, because it introduces stakes of, you don't want somebody to lose their family, you don't want somebody to lose their loved ones, and that raises the anxiety and the stakes. And I think this movie did a really great job of establishing the relationship just through their interactions, how well they work together when doing an autopsy. They have their music on, they have their expectations, they have, each one does their own thing. um, and there's encouragement, from father to son. There's hesitation with the son for, wanting to continue the line of work, and all of that is conveyed very kind of nicely and succinctly early on in the story, so that as the story itself unfolds, um, we're already we're already comfortable in what our expectations and our desires are for the characters that have been introduced to us. And I think that's neat, and I think that's unique. In a previous episode, I believe I also talked a little bit about Mike Flanagan, and although he was not involved in this film, it had very Mike Flanagan vibes. I think that a lot of the set work, the special effects, um, the way that the characters interacted, it really gave me kind of that Haunting of Hill House, or a little bit of Bly Manor, or Midnight Mass, especially, like just how people relate to each other. How the sheriff relates to um, the kind of coroner. Um, trusts his judgment with his son. Things like that. Say just offhanded comments like, "No, don't even talk about that. I've known this family for 20 years," um, and small towns are like that. These people. The funeral director because he's done every funeral for everybody that's ever died in your family. The local librarian. The sheriff because you went to school with their son or something like that. Or you went to school with the sheriff. Small towns are like that. And it's neat because small town horror is already kind of like a closed room. It's a closed experience. It doesn't have a lot of like the escapes of a big city or things like that. And there are also a lot more stories and rumors and gossiping when you come to a small town because everybody knows each other. Everybody's known somebody who knows somebody. Somebody's related to somebody. And you don't get that, as much in a big city. So small towns are already really popular in horror because it's a closed system. But then when you narrow it even further and you make a film where people are trapped in a specific space, there's a lot more anxiety with it. And a lot of the anxiety comes from usually the reason they're trapped is totally normal. So it's a big winter storm, they're snowed in, it's a hurricane, it's a tornado, it's bad weather, there's some reason that people can't leave the house. And I think we've all experienced that. I think we've all had inclement weather warnings where we're, hunkering down in the house, or we're making sure all of our loved ones are safe. We've all experienced storms where after they're over, you're checking on, the people you care about to make sure that, did you have any trees come down? Do you have power? Are you safe? Are you home? Do you need anything? And it's really kind of cool when you introduce that little bit of that isolation in horror, because it's something that we've all experienced, but it's something that we've also all experienced as a mundane part of life. When you hear that there's going to be a severe storm warning or something and you're getting ready for it and you're saying things to your friends like, oh, it's supposed to rain, it's supposed to be pretty bad, make sure your sump pump's good, or make sure that you bring your flag in so it's not blowing away, watch your trampolines. Those are all regular day-to-day things, but I think when you see a horror film that takes that isolation and turns it into part of the horror, like, no, you're trapped in this space, you can't get out, and now there is something, the outside is dangerous, and now there's something inside that's dangerous too. And that's really, it doesn't necessarily have to do with what the scare is. It could be a serial killer, it could be a monster, it could be a ghost, it could be possession, it could be being alone with your own thoughts and feelings. And I feel like you reach a broader audience when you have those closed stories, because even if I'm not a coroner, I don't know anything about an autopsy, but I do know about being like trapped inside because there's bad weather going on. And I'm pretty sure that even if I was comfortable in the place, because you have to figure the characters, they work here. They are familiar with this place. It's been in their family. So, they have generations of being very comfortable with this mortuary. So it's not any place that would feel threatening to them. It's the same as your home. If you're stuck inside because there's bad weather, you would never think of your home as like, oh, I'm unsafe, because it's your home. So then it makes it even scarier, I think, when you then start to put it in a perspective of like, oh, what if I was trapped here and there was like a ghost trying to kill me? Where would I go? What would I do? I don't have like a demon slaying book in my office or something like that. Or, I don't have like ancient tomes on how to fight ghosts. So if they kick out the internet, I'm screwed. So I think it ends up being a genre that's really inclusive. And so even if you're not into, a lot of the concepts of, kind of murder mystery-ish, supernatural kind of things, possible, possession, ghosts, witches, witchcraft, all of that stuff, demonology, whatever. If you're not into that, if you're not into that for movies, this also, I think, still would appeal only because of that isolated, closed entrapment in the horror vibe that you get with this. And overall, I mean, was it the best movie I've ever seen? Of course not. It's a movie from 2016. Um, and I've heard of it before. I've heard good things about it. I've not necessarily, I don't want to say I've avoided it, I just haven't been interested. But one of the reasons that I do the 31 Days of Horror is because I really do love horror as a genre. But I think it's really easy to kind of cherry pick and only watch the good ones. But there are a lot of gems in the bad ones. Um, there are enjoyable movies that are campy and silly, and you're not going to find them being franchised. You're not going to find them as a Halloween costume. You're not going to find them as something that, people are talking about or anything like that. But you're going to have a good time when you watch them. You're going to enjoy them. You're going to, get the scares that you're looking for, or you're going to find the characters that you love. And so I think it's important that even if it's not something you're necessarily interested in, that if you do something like I do the 31 Days of Horror, there's not 31 movies that come out in a year that are going to appeal to me. There's certainly not 31 horror movies that come out in a year that are going to appeal to me. So a lot of times I scroll through and I browse, what's on Netflix? What are these B movies? Do any of these look entertaining? What are the ones on Amazon, Paramount, Peacock, HBO? You got any good B movies for me? And then I'll check them out. And sometimes I run into movies that I just had wanted to see, I didn't have access to when they came out. There were a lot of great movies when I was younger. In the 90s, there's a lot of great 80s movies. 80s horror is classic for a lot of different things, and they were just movies I didn't have access to when I was younger, because by the time I was old enough to watch them, Blockbuster didn't exist anymore, and they were old enough or campy enough or B-rated movie enough that they weren't streaming anywhere, because at that point, streaming was really only for good movies. And so now there are so many streaming services there, and there are free ones, and there are ones that are, very low cost, or, you got to watch a couple of advertisements here or there, but you can watch whatever you want. There are so many more of those that now a lot of those older movies are coming up, and I'm going like, man, I remember wanting to see this like a whole lot, and then I couldn't find it. And you're not going to show up at Target and find it's not horror, but you're not going to show up at Target and find, Zardoz with Sean Connery on the shelf at Target, and you're certainly not going to find it as like a first run, something that you're going to find on Netflix. But if you search hard enough, you'll find it streaming somewhere. And funny story, actually, the reason I brought that movie up is because I did talk a little bit about Netflix, and that was actually the very first thing I ever rented from Netflix was Zardoz, because I had heard about it, and Blockbuster didn't have it, and it was the only place I could find it, and so I signed up for Netflix back when you still got DVDs, and I rented that, and that was the very first DVD I ever got from Netflix was Zardoz. And now this is horror, and this is another one of those like B movies you might not necessarily think of, and you certainly wouldn't think of these days. But the very first movie I ever streamed on Netflix was the movie Teeth, about the vagina dentata. Can't be like out there movie, crazy B movie, definitely worth a watch. But one of those that you definitely wouldn't, that you would stumble upon, not necessarily maybe look for. But yeah, so The Autopsy of Jane Doe. If you like that anxiety-inducing kind of trapped feeling, if you are a Mike Flanagan film and you like the kind of vibes of his stuff, if you're a fan of Brian Cox and Emile Hirsch, or I definitely think this is worth a watch. I also think there is, fair warning, there is nudity because it does take place in a mortuary and autopsies are done when the bodies are nude. Um, but I don't necessarily think anything was gratuitous. Um, there is some blood and gore, but I don't think it's anything, over the top. So I think even casual horror fans, I wouldn't necessarily say newbies, but I think this might be great for casual horror fans who are just looking for something, fun to watch this Halloween season. I would give this a recommendation. Like I said, somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. So I'd be happy to hear what you think. If you've seen the movie or if you're planning on watching it, I would love to hear any of your recommendations because I do still have, let's see, now I've got 24 days left. So, I have a few movies on my list that I want to get to, but other than that, I have a pretty open slate. And if there's something you'd like to hear me talk about, just hit me a recommendation down in the comments box. And, a like or subscribe is always appreciated, but certainly not necessary. And I will talk to you again tomorrow for day 8. Have a great day.